Hi, you're on the Alice Reddit Stories channel. Subscribe to my channel as well as to my Facebook, the link is in the description. Enjoy watching. We had been together for 4 years. We met in college, studied the same major, and it started there. We got to know each other and developed into a relationship about 4 months after, and things had been good between us since. There were, however, difficulties. To keep it short and not tell someone else's story, she had some traumatic experiences as a child that came to a head around the 12-month mark of our relationship. I urged her to try psychological intervention, and that also resulted in psychiatric help. Things got better with her over time, but admittedly, I had put all of my energy and focus on her mental well-being and modified my behaviors and thoughts as to not be the cause of her triggers and overall be as supportive as I could, and I did this with a smile. At some point, I identified symptoms of a sort of caretaker's fatigue. At the time, I had decided to chalk it up to stress from work or the pandemic or some other source of instability, but internalizing only made things worse over time. This came to a head later as I found myself consciously denying myself things I wanted for the good of her perceived mental state or giving into demands that I would rather not give into, this in an almost automatic way. I couldn't say no, and I was aware of it. After months of therapy, I now know this to be severe codependence in the relationship and learned behaviors from when I was a child, but at the time I was out of my depth as to what was happening and why I felt the way I did, resulting in severe self-hatred and loss of self-esteem. Now on to the present. As I've been made more aware and understanding of my emotional state, I had expressed to her what I found through therapy: a lot of regret, some resentment, emotional exhaustion, stress, and a deep desire to be my old self, as an unmotivated, energetic, self-confident person, which I felt I had stopped being. There have been a series of conversations where I struggled to express myself and she to understand my point of view. From what she's expressed, she understood that I regretted being in the relationship and the last 4 years we'd been together, and I wanted things to go back to the EAE they were before I met her because she had too much baggage and was dragging me down. I will be emphatic in stating that this was not the case. In a brief statement, I wanted to get to a point where I could let go of my negative emotions, take accountability for my actions, move on to much-needed personal growth, this, and be better for the relationship. Now that she in a better emotional state where it wasn't just about surviving anymore and we could start living, not to make this sound too poetic. Over the last couple of weeks, we've grown more distant and attempts at communication were resulting in more harm than good. The situation in the house was toxic and neither of us could see it get better. We inched closer to the idea of separation, but didn't act upon it. However, yesterday I arrived home from my night shift and all her stuff was gone. She was here, half asleep with the dog at the foot of the bed. Plainly she stated, paraphrasing, "I'm moving out. The dog comes with me. These are the reasons why the dog is mine. I'm willing to co-parent. The choice is yours." This I saw coming, but I wasn't ready for it. I went in the living room, had an emotional moment in the fetal position, and when I got back to the room she was already asleep. She woke me up in the morning as she was about to catch a ride to work and said we would talk about the dog in the evening. In an attempt to tap into my safety net of friends, I texted my best friend that I've known since we were 12 and who lives nearby and has become a fast friend of my ex-GF over the last 2 years, to break the news to him and maybe get some emotional support. He informed me that he knew all about the situation. That he helped her move out. That he moved her stuff into his apartment and that she will be living there until she can find a place and get settled. He also seems to be under the impression I have been aggressive and was about to leave her on the street, so she needed to be helped. I will say, and I cannot state this enough, that I have never even raised my voice at her and have never made threats, physical or otherwise, to make her even consider that a possibility, but my friend seems to believe that. I've had the rug pulled out from under me. I could see this happening in the future, but it's all happening at the same time. I feel like I'm left with nothing and I don't even have the strength or backbone to fight for what I want. I can get through the end of my relationship, but I don't want to lose my puppy and I don't know how to get over losing my friends too if it comes to that. We met in the fall of 2021 at a club meeting for our college, and the members of that club became our small friend group, around 10 people. After hanging out with the group for a while, I started to become closer friends with my ex-best friend, we'll call him Paul. In March of this year, 2022, he helped me get through a bad breakup. Then a few weeks later my PTSD was triggered and I ended up drunk texting him. He was always the funniest person in the group and he had already helped me go through a bad time, so I knew he could help cheer me up, and he did. This was the moment when I decided I could depend on him to be a best friend. Over the next few months, we got super close and started to open up about our past traumas. We texted every day and hung out with our friend group at club meetings and other outings. Then, at the end of the semester, he moved to a city about 3 hours away for his summer internship. We kept in touch through text and hours-long phone calls. Our friendship continued to grow closer despite the distance, and I loved getting to hear about his internship because we're going into similar careers. I could comfort him when he struggled with work, insecurities, or depression. We were always there to help with each other's mental health. Towards the end of the summer, I was able to take a break from work to go visit him in the city where his internship took place. I missed my bestie, and he wanted to show me all the cool places downtown. The first few days of the trip was amazing. Bar hopping, movie marathons, and some of the best food I had ever tasted. We split the bill for most things, but I wasn't able to afford some of the restaurants. However, the trip took a sour turn 2 nights before I left because he accidentally triggered my PTSD. He apologized profusely, and I told him it was okay because it was just an accident. The next day, he could tell that I was still a bit reserved, and I tried to tell him that I'll be back to normal soon. I just needed some time to get my mind right. I wanted to change topics and not think about it, but he started apologizing again and began crying because he thought he had ruined our friendship. It took about 45 minutes to an hour before I could calm him down and convince him that he was still my best friend. A few hours later, we went out to drink and celebrate the end of the internship with his coworkers. I had a great time meeting all his new friends, and all of us drank quite a bit. Paul has a pretty high alcohol tolerance, borderline alcoholic, so I didn't notice how much he drank until I had to walk him home at 1 a.m. Once we got back to his apartment, he started throwing up and I was doing my best to take care of him. This is when things got awkward. I brought him a glass of water and he said, "You're so nice and pretty, we should date," so I replied jokingly, "Oh hush, you know I'm a sarcastic asshole, you're just really drunk." However, he kept pushing the issue even after I reminded him about my sexuality. This went on for about 30 minutes before I could convince him to shower and go to bed. The next morning, he apologized for what he said, but he didn't remember everything. We laughed it off, but I was secretly happy that I had to go home that day. A few days later, we were both back in our college town and started hanging out again, but didn't bring up the bad parts of the trip. After the first week of class, my roommates and I went out to celebrate, and Paul tagged along. I had fun chatting and dancing with my roommates, but I noticed that Paul was being quiet and didn't look like he was having a good time. I tried to get him to have fun, but it didn't work, and about an hour later, we all started walking home. Once he got back to his place, I texted him to ask what was wrong, but he insisted that everything was fine. We argued for a bit before he finally told me that he was sad and jealous because it seemed like I was better friends with my roommates than him. I had just met these girls a few months ago and barely knew them. I tried to reassure him that he was still my best friend, but he was in a bad mental space and he kept twisting my words to make it seem like I was mad at him. He even made me believe I said some hurtful things that I never said. I got fed up with it, so I ignored him for a few days, but he texted to apologize and I forgave him. After that, I finally convinced him to get back into therapy, very reluctant due to past bad experiences. In the meantime, our friendship was also struggling. We argued a lot over small stuff and semantics. I had to pick each of my words very carefully because he would overanalyze everything I said and put a negative spin onto it. Now to the event that broke up our friendship. We went out with some of the club members after a meeting. I had a first date with a girl I met on Tinder the next morning, so I went out with the intention of not drinking much. However, I started having a good time with friends and I stopped worrying about a date with a girl I had never met before. The next few days, I could tell that he was upset with me, so once again I had to convince him to tell me what was wrong. Apparently, he thought that I ignored his warning because I stopped trusting him. I explained my actions and eventually apologized, but he was still hurt and couldn't accept my apology. That was hard for me to hear and I didn't know how to reply, but luckily, I had therapy the next day, so I waited to reply until I talked to my therapist about the situation. My therapist walked me through all the events that happened during our friendship and helped me identify the times he was being controlling and manipulative, even if he wasn't doing it on purpose. This was all very shocking for me to realize, and I knew I needed a break from him, so I crafted a long message to let him know that I still love him, but our relationship is unhealthy. I wished him well and said that hopefully therapy will help, so we can be friends again one day. He told me that my words hurt him and he will make sure I never see him again. Then he quit the club and didn't talk to me for a few weeks. He texted me 2 weeks ago to apologize and tell me that his therapist thinks he doesn't need therapy anymore because he has bounced back. I thanked him for apologizing and we haven't talked since. I miss having a best friend and I still love him like a brother. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel. There are many interesting articles ahead.